It's me, Georgie, again, and I'm here today to talk to you about Half of a Yellow Sun, as I've promised. This book has been written by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and it's the second one I've read so far. And what can I say? Again, I've had a true huge coup de cœur. My French readers will probably get what I mean. I actually love this book a lot, and it's very different from Americana, which I have read previously. As it deals with other topics, it deals with a different time period, but it's still on Nigeria and what basically happened there back in the 60s, 70s, something like that. Most of the events are centered around 1968, 1969, if I'm not mistaken. I will be sometimes looking down, as I have made notes, as I have promised, and I hope you will enjoy this video as much as I've enjoyed my thought process and my reflection period on this book. I think we should talk about the title itself, which is Half of a Yellow Sun. And before we get into the deeper meaning, we should start first with the actual image it creates. When we look at Half of a Yellow Sun, it's always about perspective. We can choose to look at the bright side, we can choose to look at the dark. Same analogy when we talk about the book itself. This symbol is both the symbol of the birth of a nation as it is the symbol of its downfall. Basically, Half of a Yellow Sun is the symbol of Biafra, which is a new state that was created inside of Nigeria. From what I read at the end of the book, most of what happened in the book is inspired by actual true events and by stories that the author heard from her relatives that lived in that period. At some point in time, more specifically between 1968 and 1969, there has been a war, a civil war between the Nigerian state and the newfound Biafra. And basically this is what the story is about. And not really. It starts somewhere before the war and ends soon after the war has ended. It is told from the point of view of three characters. The first character is Ugu, which is a houseboy who works for an intellectual near the University of Nsukka. Then there's Olana, who is the daughter of the new nouveau riche elite of Lagos. And then there's Richard, who is a white man who has a sort of fascination for Nigeria and for its art and people. The three characters get to interact with each other, as Ugu is the houseboy of Obednigbo, who will become Olana's boyfriend, and Richard falls in love with Kainene, which is the twin sister of Olana. Basically, they all get to meet each other, and they all get to see the war a different way. I think it's really interesting that there are three different lenses used to take a look at the story. Ugu is unexperienced, he's very young when he becomes a houseboy. He learns English in the house of Obenigbo and gets to see the intellectuals gathering there. He gets to listen to all the talks they have. He gets to read the books of his master, as he calls him. And he has high aspirations and hopes for his future, as he managed to get out of his home village and basically got ahead in life somehow. I also think that Olana's representation is one of the largest ones in the book. She's the one that's most present, with certain parts which are told from the point of view of Richard, who is a newcomer, who first is white, which in many African novels is seen as the figure of the oppressor. However, he actually manages to integrate into the culture thanks to his modesty, let's say. He's really empathetic towards the Igbo people. He even manages to learn their language. He writes about them, he writes about their struggles while creating a new state. And he also falls in love with Kainene and actually appreciates and respects her. which kind of takes him apart from the other expats who live in Nigeria, who only want to take something, to grab some of the resources, to get some nice contracts, who are basically always showing some sort of malice towards the local population and towards their habits and towards their culture. He, on the other hand, is always open towards other people, and he always interacts with a lot of natives of Nigeria, and is actually really enthusiastic and cannot understand this short-mindedness that is showed by the other expats. He is expected to behave the same way as the expats, but slowly and really gradually he manages to distance himself from that mentality of the conqueror, and he manages to get closer to the mentality of the tourist, or towards the mentality of an expat who manages to actually integrate into the community in which he wants to be a part of. It would be interesting to see actually how there came a time in which a civil war was necessary in Nigeria, and to understand what generated and what basically what was the source of that war, we would need to look at the before the war period, and to look at that we should look at the bits which are told from the point of view of Ugu. He is a houseboy in the house of Obenigbo, who was considered a sort of revolutionary lover. He is called that by Olana's twin sister, who kind of sarcastically calls her an idealist. However, she was kind of on point with her assumption, as he used most of his time to idealize about what a perfect state should look like, how it should function, how it should be. However, he never did something concrete about it. In the before the war period, intellectuals would gather inside Obenigbo's house, and they would talk about theories. They would talk about colonists. They will talk about the face of capitalism. They will talk about the nouveau riche and the way they stole something from Nigeria and how they kind of dehumanized the whole nation. However, they wouldn't do anything. The makers were the nouveau riche people, because they got they got first to the big contracts. They would win a lot of money out of them. There was a budding corruption, and there was a system of bribing that was in place, which allowed for a very small number of people to be reached, and most of the other people were left out of it, basically. And that created a sort of feeling of discontent, because the power was belonged to the rich Igbo people. Overall, the Igbos were very rich, and then the other not nationalities, they were more like ethnic groups, were not could not have access to those riches, and they felt somehow deprived of them, like it was their right to. They thought it was their right to have those riches for themselves. These nouveau riche people were characterized by the same things every nouveau riche category would have. They would have luxurious parties, they would be very opulent, they would have exaggerated manners, exaggerated fashion, their clothes would be very richly made, and there was a harsh contrast between how these people looked and how Ugu lived, for example, in his hut, in his village, in poverty. That was the main problem. There was a huge contrast between this small number of people and the rest of Nigeria. Also, there was a rising discontent among the ethnic groups that constitute the population of Nigeria. Overall, the Hausa people were very discontent with the situation, and they wanted to take over the country by force. And basically that's what triggered the war. And you have corruption, when you have discontent among your people, and you only have intellectual theories that haven't been tested in practice, you have a huge problem on your hands. However, you should not expect the regular war stories with soldiers, with with blood, with war. It's the war story told from the point of view of the people who are directly influenced by it. This is not a war story told neither by the conquerors, neither by those who eventually lost the war. It's a story of the people. And the people who managed to live through the shortages, who managed to live through the struggles. And it's the story of the people who managed to be actually serene at the end of the day and not be totally dehumanized by the war machine. I adored just how African this story is. This is a story of proud people. It's a story about their manners and their mannerisms and about their culture. It's a beautiful contrast made. There's a beautiful contrast made between the people living in the countryside and their manners, and people who live in the urban milieu and who are more cultured, or they assume they are more cultured and more elevated than the others. I also appreciated just how resilient these people were in the sight of tragedy. There were bits of the stories which literally made me cry while reading. And one of the most significant episodes would be the one which took place in an airport. Richard got to be the witness of just what the war can do to a nation. Basically, he was expecting to check in the airport when a couple of Hausa people dressed in military uniforms with big guns entered the airport, and they started picking out who of the people waiting to board the plane were Igbo, sorry. And they would basically pick and choose whoever they thought was Igbo. Thus the intruder, thus the person who was guilty for all their problems, basically, of all their problems. And basically they would choose a person and they would shoot that person on the spot. The thing that touched me the most was the fact that they killed on the spot one of the persons with whom Richard got to actually talk. They had a friendly chat, and then he moved away and got seated somewhere. And then the soldiers entered and they just blew the brains off that person. And he actually got to witness that. And he was actually scared for his life, although he had a sort of white privilege which protected him from that carnage. And it's scary, but sometimes, I don't know, I saw myself thinking about it while I was reading, and I started comparing it with what happens nowadays with terrorists and with all the problems that have been going on. And I thought just how real that scene was and how it could happen to any of us. Imagine what happened in Brussels, for example. That would be the exact same example, basically. Although it was done with guns, it was done with bombs, not with guns. That's basically the only difference. But the carnage existed, and there was this trauma. And it was told in a way that was so raw to me that I actually stood there crying with my book in my lap, and I couldn't stop myself from actually crying. It's like you witnessed the scenes yourself, like you felt the things they felt, you felt their panic, and it's basically how everybody would feel in face of such a tragedy. However, I appreciated that although they were witnessing so much trauma and so much drama and so much pain, and they were experiencing an extreme situation, they actually managed to keep their humor. They managed to keep their witticisms. They managed to keep their head up, basically, and all that tension was actually shown in a really realistic way, and that's what I really appreciated about this text. After all, the war decenters people, it ruins their routines, it makes people live in constant anxiety, you cannot communicate with thy neighbor, you witness the death of your family, of your loved ones, of your friends, you actually get to witness trauma over and over again, and you get to even pass over to get over PTSD in a way that is, it just, you cannot just read it and then go on with your life without actually reflecting on it, without actually thinking just the pain through which these people went. Plus, it destroys every single idea you can have about Africa being a continent filled with people who are needy, who need our help, who need our rescue. It's so far from what I have known about Africa, about what you see on TV. It's simply an experience that we could all go through that experience and actually feel the same way. It's harrowing. It's actually harrowing. This is not even the first African book that I've ever read. I've read Egyptian authors, I've read Moroccan authors. I love Moroccan authors. I've read some bits and pieces about Syria, written by Syrian authors, and I'm actually enthusiastic about this part of the world. I'm actually fascinated by Africa, and I would like to read more about it, because it's just, even the fact that this book is not a sad book tells a lot about what the Nigerians, and not only the Nigerians, are, and just how resilient they are, as I've mentioned before. It's a book that has everything. It has love stories, it has betrayal, it has a war, it has sadness, it has happiness, it has bliss, it has destruction, it has blood sometimes. But basically, this is how life is. This is how life could be for any of us in the future. Maybe it's the near future, maybe it's the far future. We never know. We never know what happens and what could happen in this world. Just look at the news today, especially the world news, and just look what happens in Syria. And I personally get the shivers, basically. I think precisely because this book has a bit of everything, this book is gonna become a classic, as I think the Time called it. I think, because I don't have the book on me, so I cannot. Don't quote me on that. Also, as I've read this book, I've come to the conclusion that I have so much more to read. And I have so much more to experiment, because there are a lot of authors and there are a lot of great stories out there, not just African. Like, war happens everywhere, and not just war. There are so many cultures that still need to be experienced. But when it comes to this specific topic of African literature, I think Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's book is one of the starting points. It's a great starting point to actually learn more about a nation and learn more about something that I personally did not know about so much until I've read Americana and then this book. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I decided to do it as a video and not so much as a story, because I think it helps more with fluency. I really cannot focus on those 15 seconds. It really doesn't help me. And if you've liked it, please give me hearts. I love hearts. Give me hearts. Like me, please. And hopefully the next book I'm gonna talk about soon enough will be of interest to you as well. Thank you so much, and hopefully next week I'm gonna come at you with another book. I hope you have a wonderful day with a wonderful book. Till then, bye guys!